Hello and welcome back to the Single Malt Review. Thank you once again for joining us today. As you will be becoming imminently aware, we're looking at another raft, another flight of tastings here. Dave has lovingly crafted us this trifecta of Glenglassaugh whiskies. So tell us more, Dave.
Well, Glenglassaugh, the now quite iconic Highland distillery, famously mothballed from 86 until 2008, was it, when they got back in business?
Yes, 20 years.
Yeah, then acquired by the Glendronach Benriach.
Yes, the Benriach Distilling Company, or by way of Brown Forman these days, I suppose.
Now part of their stable, and doing pretty well for themselves.
Yes, presumably. It's not a whiskey that I've heard too much about. It's just sort of quietly smouldered there, which is understandable given that they did not have a lot of stock at all, so they've kind of had to start from scratch in 2008.
Yeah.
So that means they'll be looking at their first, assuming they got going immediately, they'll be looking at their first 10-year-old whiskey next year.
Yeah.
Which would be very interesting to
At
see.
the last Dram Fest here in Christchurch, I was lucky enough to sample some of the 30-year-old Glenglassaugh from before they bade us farewell the last time. I don't remember much about it except that it was really very good.
Yeah, the Glenglassaugh is one of those whiskies that still floats around. You know, old, previous Glenglassaugh, pre-1986 Glenglassaugh. It still does pop up now and then, and because it's not one of these sort of hot shot. It's no Port Ellen or Brewer or whatever else closed distilleries that does still float around and do its trade. It's not got quite the esteem of those, so it is one of the more affordable ones, and there's quite a lot of it still around. So if anyone that wants to try it probably can with a little bit of searching. But at any rate, this stuff is all new, all recent stuff from the Benriach Distilling Company managed reopening.
Now, in this little trifecta of miniatures, we have the Revival, the Evolution, and finally the Peated Torfa, which we'll sample in that order.
Yes, I've only tried the Revival. The other two are, the Evolution is completely new news to me, and the Torfa I knew they did, but I've never tried it, so it will be fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
The entire range is thankfully unchill filtered, not coloured. The Revival here, 46% ABV, as opposed to 50 for the other two. Now, Tim, the Revival, you looked into its composition.
Yes, it is an interestingly composed whiskey. It's bourbon and red wine cask, which could mean a great many things. Matured, I suspect it will be far and away the majority bourbon, but that red wine will have its influence in there somewhere. And then it is finished for 6 months, which is about the minimum in my book, in Oloroso sherry. So it's what you call a double matured, I guess, would be the standard term.
And quite a mixture.
Yeah, it's for an uncoloured whiskey that is pretty healthy.
Yeah, especially a fairly young whiskey too. What's the estimated age on this one?
Well, that's a bit of a thing. I mean, Revival has been around for years now, and when it first came out, it could have only been 3 years old, and I didn't like it. It tasted 3 years old, in my opinion. Tasted 3 years old. It looked kind of almost sickly. It was, I don't know, I didn't like it. It was very, very young. This one could be almost 10 years old, depending on the whiskey involved.
It is quite a rich colour for a fairly young whiskey at 46%.
Yeah. So I will, not knowing any hard facts, I'll hold my judgment until I've actually tasted it, and give you my estimation, which is usually, give or take, not too far off, especially when we're only dealing with whiskey that's, it's going to be a number between 3 and 9, so even if I guess, I've got a good chance. Anyway.
Well, that's a curious nose. I'm immediately getting lots of strong red wine tannins. There's quite a bit of like a Shiraz property to that.
It is quite... There's a robustness to it. The first thing because I'm super sensitive to it, and I wish I wasn't, but I get a lot of young pot distilled whiskey off this. So it's not hiding its youth, but
I'm getting a few lashings of some of that like fresh sherry cask sulphur as well.
Yeah. It is. It's smelling way more of a complete whiskey than it did, say 3 years ago when I last tasted a bottle of this.
I think there's going to be a lot to unpack here, so I'm going to top up my glass just a little to ensure I can have a few good swigs of this just to get the full range. I feel it's going to be
we're not going to be coming back to any of these micro bottles anyway, so we might as well just go all in.
The 50ml mini, excellent for being able to try a range of things. Not great if you want to come back to it again and again. But, that aside,
So yeah, there is quite good evident oak here. I'm not getting a hell of a lot from the finish, but again, it's only 6 months. There's only so much you can do.
I'm getting quite a bit of a sherry cask influence on the nose, but that's just me.
The red wine it's there, but it's a bit difficult to tease out without knowing exactly what sort of cask it was, because red wine casks can vary so dramatically depending on where they came from, what we did in them. But there's the bourbon's there, and it's fairly graspable, and the sort of Highland character is there as well. Glenglassaugh is, I guess, it's kind of a middle of the road Highland one. It's not a hugely full-bodied or lightweight spirit. It's just kind of there, and it's a West Coast Highland too as well. So it's not typical to any particular region. It's not really close to anybody. I mean, there are distilleries proximate, but you've described Scotland there. So, but it is kind of just hanging out there, hanging out on the West Coast.
That's left quite a high tide mark in my glasses. I've been swirling it, so there may well be some oils, perhaps some quite heavy body in there. So I'm going to dive on in and see what's on the tongue. Whoa, that's very prickly. That's some young, vibrant whiskey.
Yeah, actually, that's got a bit more to say on the palate. There is a nice, savoury, mellow quality there. It's a very, very... It really, really glues itself to the tongue. Yeah. It's got a lovely oiliness to it, which I wasn't expecting from the nose, and it's also surprisingly long. This is, I can say, far and away, way better than the revival that I tried 3 years ago. Probably because it's 3 years older. It's probably at least 6 years old rather than at least 3 years old, which was what was sort of going around when I last sort of convened with this one. It's still probably a blend of casks, age-wise. It's probably still some young-ish whiskey and some old-ish whiskey. There'll be stuff around the 8-year-old mark and stuff around the 6-year-old mark, but I don't think there's anything too much younger than that, because I think it would be pointless tipping it in.
Now, the first and foremost effect I'm getting from this is extremely rapid fire. It hits you very quickly with a bunch of different flavours in succession. First, there's a hit of bourbon. There is some smoky wood, some citrus, and some vanilla, and immediately that's replaced by lashings of red wine. So some tannins, some plums, some of that rich, dark, stewed fruit. Then finally, some of the dry fruitiness, a whiff of sulphur, and there's other typically sherry cask characters from that finish.
I'm being quietly impressed by this.
There's so many flavours in such a short space of time.
It is quite difficult to describe, but there's the way this just adheres to the tongue and just really coats the mouth and does, as you say, a lot in a short space of time. Not to say it's a short palate. It's actually very, very long. It sort of has a nice long tail that keeps on going. So it's a very full-bodied, densely, intrinsically oily whiskey. I really like that. That's
I was expecting it to be a bit huge, chaotic because of a sheer mixture of casks involved, but it's just kind of like each flavour just swoops in one after the other and says its piece, and then makes way for the next one.
It's something that rarely comes up, which is good, because it's something that's very difficult to describe. It's a whiskey that has a huge amount of texture to it, and that's nearly impossible to describe the texture of a whiskey beyond saying that it is itself a textural whiskey. But this one, it may be the most textural whiskey that I've tasted this year. It's really, really dense, sits on the tongue, hangs around in the mouth, and it's got this sort of hugely viscous. It really is quite a force there.
I've added the smallest splash of water here, and now I want to see what you think. But for me now, the nose has transformed into almost pure Glenglassaugh or Aberlour.
It's sweetened and freshened, which I would expect. I'm not sure I'd say Glenglassaugh, but maybe Aberlour. Certainly, the more Aberlour has more of a fresh fruitiness than
shifted to that end of the spectrum.
Glenglassaugh is a bit more sort of metallic and complicated. But
more fruits, but more dryness as well.
Aberlour certainly. I think it's somewhat inflamed the finish, which has brought it here.
Ooh. And it has also inflamed, again, the finish, but also some of that red wine too. That's taken some of the sweetness off and replacing it with sharper, darker, more tannic properties.
That's really quite astounding. I wasn't expecting that at all. This could not be less like
your previous experience.
Yeah, the tasting the revival of 3 years ago. This whiskey has been transformed by a wee bit more age. It's a little bit difficult for me to wrap my critical mind around this. In terms of its strength of character, its force of character, its texture, and how much it's really, really represents itself on the palate. It is an incredible whiskey. That's entirely dependent on whether you like the flavour. Yeah. And it's not my absolute favourite style. But if it was, I'd be losing my mind drinking this. If this was 100% the style of whiskey that was my favourite, this would be absolutely incredible. And it's still an amazing feat that they've produced something like this with such young whiskey. And I'm not sure what vector did it.
It is such a peculiar mix of casks as well.
I can tell you this much: it's not the bourbon. Bourbon will never. It'll produce perfectly good whiskey. It will never produce something with the texture that this has. I think they might have struck upon something in the red wine that they've aged it with, which is kind of steamrolling the normal bourbon flavours and really making itself known. What will be a real test is whether this, when we're finally, and I mean hopefully soon, when we're being able to see 10-year-old Glenglassaugh, whether it maintains whatever the magic that this has. It could be a real whiskey to watch, but I suppose we'll catch up with these other bottles. But for now, this is a kind of a one-off for me. But it makes it nonetheless astounding. This is an 89 from me. This is really, really stunning whiskey. It's an 89, and it's a whiskey that I don't even like the style of the whiskey. It's not really up my alley, but it's so forceful in what it does. It hits the mark so hard that I can't score it any lower than that. What do you think?
It's such a peculiar, eclectic mix of a whiskey, but it works nicely. All the flavours gel, they come at you fast and strong, and I give it 90 points.
Yeah, no, I couldn't disagree. This is it's a real out of the park thing. I mean, what will be really fascinating, and follow along with us on this one, as to whether this is like a flash in the pan fluke that they've got from just this bottling, or whether the whole range will have this sort of weight to it. I'm fascinated to find out. So we're going to get immediately onto this one, and sadly you at home are going to have to wait until I've gotten off my bum and produced the video, but we're going to find out right now. So stay with us, Slanja. I'll try not to take too long, because this is getting really exciting now. We'll be right back.